All right, Sandy. So if we had to, what's a different way that we could get more out of every hour that we spend studying for the PMP exam? You have any advice?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I like to, implore my students, I try to stress with them is, yes, you're studying this material to pass the exam, but the flip side of it is you're studying this material because it can help you become a better project manager. So I think if you're studying the material, I mean, one of the examples I always use is with risk management. I
Mm-hmm.
always will ask my students, how many of you in your projects identify risks? And they're like, oh, if I have 15 students, I might have 5 raise their hands.
Right.
Like, okay, that's great. That's great that you've identified risks. Once you identified those risks, what did you do with them? What was the
Mm.
next step? And they all just kind of,
Yeah.
and we didn't do anything. Okay, all right, that's totally fine. The first step is identifying them, right? But
Yeah.
then, when you're studying this material, I think it's really good to look at it from the perspective of, okay, if I'm managing this project and I'm identifying risks, that's great. But then what do I do with those risks once I've identified them? How do
Mhm.
I apply this? How can I help my projects when I go back to work,
Mhm.
right? How can I help the company save money, right? That kind of thing. So for me, it's, yes, study the material, make sure you
Sure.
understand it so you can pass the exam. But then also, how can I make this be beneficial to me, right? PMP, great, yeah, but how can I study this material? How can I make it beneficial for when I go back to work and what I can do to improve the way I manage my projects? But I think looking at it from that perspective also helps you retain it because you think about it differently. You think about, okay, I've
Mhm.
identified these risks. Now I need to analyze them. What's the probability? What's the impact?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. If you think of it from that perspective on how you would apply it for an actual project, then I think you retain it a lot more.
100% agree. And that's part of like the reason why I wrote that John story. Like, as we were going through it, it's like, hey, I hadn't done all these things, like hadn't dealt in procurement, hadn't done these other things like as a leader. But like, if you can follow what you're talking about, if the person out there can start putting themselves through the journey, either theoretically to say like, how could that help my projects? Or when would it have benefited me? Like, but if we can actually start putting it into practice and going down and feeling the pain of like, oh, that didn't work, or, oh, that's better. And wow, I got the benefit out of it. And what you learn as you go through it, then it starts to like be in the DNA instead of just like, oh, the PMBOK told me that I have to do this about halfway through the game. So
Yeah, and I have a lot of students who will say the PMBOK guide is 750 pages long. There's no way I'm going to implement that. And I'm like, you're absolutely right, right?
true.
I always say, okay, if it's a 2-week project and you try to implement the
Yeah.
entire PMBOK guide, your project will be finished, and months later you'll finish with your project management plan, right? It just doesn't work that way. But if you're building, one of those new 7,000 passenger cruise ships, you probably want to use most of the processes in the PMBOK guide, right?
Mhm.
So it's more about understanding what's realistic and how you would apply things to your projects, and thinking about it from that perspective, and just saying, oh, this is just crazy to try to do all this.
Yeah.
So I think applying it to real life will make a big difference in studying.
Right. And at the end of the day, if you can apply it to real life, you will get better. You will find the holes in your game and you will get a better score. So if you follow those lessons, we get a better score. So good to
Yeah.
go. Thank you.